Okay, I'm going to start with the summary of where we've been. The first session, we sort of opened the case on the notion of Temuna, which is translated by Shlomo Penis and Leo Strauss in the Guide for the Perplexed as the figure of God. And Maimonides in the Guide for the Perplexed focuses on Temuna as the way in which one gets to know God. If you can know the Temuna, then you're close. Okay, so what we've been trying to do is we've been looking at different angles about this Temuna business, because the Temuna is not an image. It's going to turn out, at least in my opinion, to be an operator, an operation, a motion of mind rather than an image of anything. In any case, we did the first one with Temuna. We looked at Salzman's article, which had to do with trying to get a level of self-consciousness outside of your normal self-consciousness to be able to look at yourself. And then we moved on. One of the things that I want to highlight is we did a session on the Tao Te Ching. So we looked at Lao Tzu's first poem, where he talks about the relationship between the nameless and the name, the nameless and the name, two opposite things. And my contention is the nameless is the synthetic aspect of your mind, and the named is the analytic aspect of your mind, also two opposite things. And the idea is to somehow become aware of both of these things if you can. Now, today, what we're going to do is Charles is going to take a look at, I think, the central piece of what we're up to with this, and that is chapter 3 of Exodus, where he's going to tell us what is Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. And anyway, go ahead, Charles.
Well, I'll do my best to add anything to this conversation. This is the traditional story that we all know and love. The beginning of the Exodus story and the seminal moment where I guess we can say if we stick with the idea of the Temuna as not necessarily being a visual image. So there's the question of whether the burning bush is a burning bush in reality or a burning bush in Moses's mind, whether all of this is some kind of a vision that he has as opposed to an actual physical event. I have to say that prior to this class, I always assumed that it was a physical reality, right? Because of the many mentions of the bush not being consumed. So just somehow because of the verbiage, it always felt to me like this was trying to make the point that it was actually there. But of course, they don't mention anything about heat, or anything on the ground scorching or any details other than this, emanation happening within the bush. So I always, as I said, was always inclined to think of it as something that was actually happening, sort of akin to when the column of fire is over the tabernacle or the camp and then leading the way through the desert. Was that a real column of flame, or was that in the minds of all of the Israelites and they're simply following this calling, if you will? So I'm not sure I'm equipped to figure out that distinction there. But the chapter paints not just a picture of the circumstances that exist in Egypt, right? God does talk about how he has heard the call, he's heard the cry. from his people and is coming, as it's descending to address this issue, to take care of this problem. But it also paints the picture for the future of what the national experience is going to look like when this event, whatever is about to happen, right? And I guess that you can say embodied in the name, right? As he tells Moses, tell people Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which, I am what I will be what I will be. In other words, it's all in the future tense, right? It doesn't actually say, by the way, I did X, Y, and Z. It's all about what I will do for you in the future. Although mentioning history because I am the God of all of your ancestors, right? And that's so tying those two things together. But it paints the picture of the land of milk and honey. Although interestingly enough, it does paint the picture of the land that seemingly belongs to 14 other groups at the moment, right? It says the land of the Canaanites and the Jebusites and the Perizzites and the Hittites. So by the way, you're going to their land. It's politically and historically, it's an interesting description. It doesn't say the land that necessarily that I will just give you that's going to be yours. It's I'm taking you to this group's land, and it's going to be a land full of milk and honey, flowing with milk and honey, and it's going to be a beautiful future for you. So that's I don't think I have any other particular insights to offer at the moment.
Okay,
About the reading.
that's very good. That's a nice overview of the thing.
I never realized that it is, I will be what I would.
Right,
I
future tense.
always thought it was the present.
Well, but it is the present too.
No, so it's Ehyeh. Ehyeh starting with the aleph,
Yeah.
which is the form for the future tense.
No, I didn't
So
realize that.
Ehyeh, and so it's the future tense.
And can I just, the only other thing, I think you captured everything I sort of felt. Just one quick question. We are using the word Hashem.
Well, Chabad is, or yeah.
I always use the word Hashem.
Mhm.
And that's how I was taught to
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at it. Is that not a universal?
No,
No, I don't
some
know.
people
It's-
call it, some people, I mean, the Hashem, it seems to me, is pointing out that whatever you call God is simply a name, simply an attribute you're giving him. You don't know
Really
anything
know.
about it. You don't know
Okay,
anything
all right.
about it. That's what Hashem is
That's-
telling you.
okay, thank you.
Okay, the thing, there's a couple of things to look at in this, at least in my opinion. And, in section 3 there, in verse 3, it says, Moses said, let me turn now and see this great spectacle. Now, why would he have to turn if the thing was an object outside of him and that he already saw? Why would he have to turn? And then in verse 4, it said the Lord saw that he had turned. Okay, so the word turning is used twice.
Mhm.
And that's what gives me the notion that what we're talking about is an internal event in Moses. And the internal event one could think of in the beginning as some sort of illumination of the synthetic aspect of his mind, which is the place where you have your yarmulke, okay? I think I mentioned this in one of you weren't there, but I mentioned this, that the Greeks talk about the nous and the dianoia. And the nous of the mind is this. The nous of the mind is the synthetic aspect of the mind. And the dianoia, and what it does is it pulls together everything. And the dianoic aspect of the mind is the analytic, which is the forehead when you put it to fill it. Okay, so Moses being God, when I went to school in the beginning, everybody said you should take a look at Moses. Okay, Moses, what's happening with Moses is a real big deal, and it's really sort of an important thing to pay attention to. Moses, it turns out, is the only person, I think, in the Torah, who actually asks God about himself, right? And he asks God about himself on 2 occasions. He asks God about himself in chapter 3 and in chapter, I think it's 33. Chapter 3, he asks God, I want to know something about you so I can tell my buddies, and they will somehow get the feeling that I haven't made this up. Okay, so he wants to know something about God. Chapter 33, he wants to know. He says, "Show me your ways." Okay, so Moses is very, very curious. Moses is not your average pious person who, upon having an internal experience of illumination, gets down on his hands and knees and prays to God. Moses is a philosopher too. So upon having his internal experience, he becomes curious about it, very curious about it, and wonders about it. His turning is that act of wonder. That act of wonder is his turning to be able to focus his dianoic aspect of his mind on the noose part of his head. Okay, so what he's trying to do is he's trying to look at himself. He's trying to look at himself. He's trying to get to know how this particular thing occurred, how this inner illumination occurred that he felt behind his head where the yarmulke is, and what it is. And the way to look at oneself, the way to get a line on that is to look with the dianoic aspect of your mind, which is the analytic part of the mind. So that's where I'm coming from, and my reading of this that has to do with the notion that particular experience that Moses had. Now, it could be also a projection too, okay, but it could be that he's projected the experience outward and he sees it over there, but it's actually occurring here. But he also knows that it's occurring there, and that's why he turns. And God, and in this particular section, it says that God, in 4, it said the Lord saw that he had turned. Okay, the Lord saw that he had turned to see. And God called him from within the thorn bush and he said, "Moses, Moses," and he said, "Here I am." So the Lord saw that Moses, he's curious. The Lord saw that Moses turned to look, okay? And in turning to look, Moses sort of announces the fact that he wants some kind of relationship with God. And the God that Moses ends up having a relationship with has a really deep relationship. Okay? So, yes, go ahead.
But the person who described who is relating this, because how does somebody know what the supreme being thinks or senses or sees? Someone else is writing it.
Right. Well, let's assume that, listen, let's assume that Moses is writing it. I mean, that's the tradition, unless you got a better idea. I mean,
no, I don't. I'm just saying it is a sensible. It's something that might be. It's an interpretation.
Oh, sure.
And because we're not expressing. It's that's what we sense as ever relating it, whether it's Moses or who's ever jotting it down after the fact.
Well, but our tradition says that whatever happened to Moses with God, how it's related to us in Torah was given to Moses directly by God. So it's God's depiction of the interaction between, I mean, that would be the traditional sense, but I have heard Chabad rabbis talk about things, excerpts from the Torah where they refer to the narrator of the story as an integral part. So there's the female scholar Simi Peters, who writes about Midrash, and she has a book that tries to help people figure out how to analyze and read Midrash. And she she includes the narrator as a person in the story, right? So that there's some, I guess you could say that there's some flexibility about how you view these.
Absolutely,
elements of it.
absolutely. Now, the way I read the Torah personally, as I read it for clues, I'm interested in clues.
Yeah.
The history isn't as important to me as clues. Now, what kind of clues am I looking for? I'm looking for clues as to how I get close to the divine thing, okay? How I get to know God. That's what I'm reading the Torah for. And I read Moses's interactions with God very, very carefully, because that's where I'm going to get the best clues, because he is said to be, Maimonides classifies prophecy into, I think, 12 sections. And he is the biggest guy. He's the big man. He's the prophet that in fact has a mouth-to-mouth relationship with God.
Right.
A mouth-to-mouth meaning.
The only one. Yeah.
Mouth-to-mouth meaning, not images, not enigmatic statements, but actually the way a man talks to his friend. Okay, that's
It's just the way Mel Brooks did it.
yeah, that's right. The way Mel Brooks did it, that works. Good. Anyway, so Moses
I
has,
have a question.
sure.
If you don't mind. So I think that it's fair, and it's frequently a reading of many parts of the story after the Exodus. That, and not just with regards to Moses, I should say, throughout Torah, that there are many moments that are described as tests that are provided by God to see whether the human beings will respond.
Yeah, whether he's ready
Right.
for this.
So the actual wording here in verses 3 and 4, it almost looks like, right? So
Absolutely.
God is saying, I wonder if this guy really can be a leader that I need to do what I need done to rescue my people from Egypt. So let me see. And I think I've seen in other places, maybe in the Chumash, it's not all that unusual in the desert to see a bush on fire. The difference, of course, would be the fact that it doesn't burn up. It's not consumed. So the distinction then is that Moses has to notice that this burning bush is not like the others.
Okay, but yeah, but
And then his inner curiosity
well, it depends
leads
what
him to,
right. It
yeah,
depends what
yeah,
stage
yeah,
Moses was at
Mm.
saw this.
So
I would assume that Moses has been practicing the kind of meditation or contemplation that got the back of his head sort of lit up. Okay, and then all of a sudden it really got lit up. Okay, so it got lit up in a way that called his attention to it, and he turns to look at it, and God says, "Aha, this is the guy that I'm looking for. This is somebody that
pass the first test.
right, somebody that actually has curiosity and not too much fear." Okay,
Sure.
now suppose that happened to you. Suppose you're walking around, you're kicking a beer can down the road or whatever it is, and you're looking around, and all of a sudden you have the same experience as Moses. Are you going to be as nonplussed about it? You're going to just sit and sort of and try and move your eyes so that your eyes can see the back of your head. By the way, the Greeks have a word for that. It's called periagogia. Periagogia. And periagogia is the motion of the dianoic aspect, the eyes in front, to be able to look at the back of your head. Okay. So, I think that's right what you said, that Moses is gone through kind of an early test to see. Now, God's probably looking at it in other ways too. It says here, there is a mention of a mountain here, right? He came to, and most of the time when we're talking about mountains and we're talking about ascending mountains, we're talking about an act of trying to know God or trying to get close to God. When you're talking about ascending mountains, okay? You ascend the mountain.
Tower of Babel.
Yeah, you ascend the mountain in reality, but you ascend the mountain in other words. I wanna take a look at what's the difference between, I think this is a good way to start. Ehyeh, and what the Greeks, have, when I went to the Oracle at Delphi, I went to the Oracle at Delphi, my wife and I went, we paid our dog, and I sat in the proper position, with the Oracle behind me, and the Oracle said, "Hey, David," called my name, said, "You have to know yourself. I have to know myself." That seems to me to have also a self-referential structure, knowing oneself. Okay, and we'll see whether we can do that. Is that possible to know oneself? Is that the same as God saying, "I am what I am," which is also self-referential? Okay, so God is saying, "I am what?" Usually when you make a statement of "I am," you follow that by some sort of attribute. I am tall, I'm small, I have a yarmulke on, I'm fat, I'm skinny, but it's not an attribute. I am what I am. So if this "I am" turns around on itself and looks at itself, right? I am what I am. That's a very strange thing to say. It's like
You're
saying,
referring to God's statement.
yeah,
of the
yeah,
name.
right.
Yeah, but of course it's not. I mean,
Okay, I will be what I will be. Same
Yes.
thing, same thing, same thing. I will be what I will be. I mean, I take the A also as I am what I am. I mean, for God, past, present, and future, I would hope are all the same, right?
no, they're not.
Well,
Because the Torah tells us that there's an evolution in God's thinking.
okay, well,
Right.
that's very interesting. So that God, so that
Right? God says, "I made mistakes and I won't do that again." And
okay.
it's happened several times.
So then the God, the philosopher's God is a little bit different. The philosopher's God is a God that's invariant as to time. Invariant as to time. The Torah's God is a God that changes
An
according to
evolutionary God.
circumstance.
So then
Yeah,
I will be whatever.
It makes perfect sense.
yeah, that does. make sense.
Because I don't even know exactly what I need to do until I see what's required. Now, you could obviously argue that if God created everything,
Yeah,
and God knows
everything ahead of
exactly what's
time.
gonna
Yeah,
happen,
so,
except, and you end up with the philosophical argument of,
or they got free will.
and we seem to have free will to make mistakes and then be reprimanded for them.
Right.
And that
right.
being the case, you could still say, well, God knows you're gonna make that mistake and you're gonna make that mistake, and he knows what the consequences will be and knows how it's gonna play out, and, right?
Well, yeah, but you can also say.
No, it doesn't, sure. From your perspective, but not at all.
No, but when God knows things, it's a little different than when we know things, right?
Right.
We know things. But for example, let's get back to the Oracle tells me I should know myself.
Yeah,
I should know myself. Now that's there's an I in me there, and there's a self. And supposedly the I is different from the self, right? To get to know yourself. When God says, "I am what I am," it isn't really knowing, it's being. He's talking about being. I'm being what I am being. It's a little bit different. But my contention is that if you get to know yourself, you also get to know God. That's the contention.
right.
Does that sound strange to you?
No.
Okay.
Since we are God's creation, and so, and the contention is that there's a part of God's spark spirit, however you describe it, in every element of creation, then certainly knowing yourself means you're knowing something more about the Creator.
Right, and in fact, the notion is this kind of knowing, which is reflexive, a reflexive knowing, a self-knowing, self-referencing, a circular referencing. That action is a very important action. We do it all the time. We don't know. Like, for example, even normal thinking. Okay, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to start to think, and then I'm going to reflect on what I was thinking, right? So the thinking itself has to look at itself as if in a mirror. Okay, so we're doing that all the time. Anytime we use aspects of our intellect like that, we are using a tool that, by the way, the guys who were into, the first guy that was into this was a guy named John Locke. He was a philosopher. First
He can't have
psychologist.
been the first.
No, he was, but he was,
40,000 years ago.
no. But what he said was he sort of created modern psychology for us. I'm not,
No, I understand. I understand.
I don't think the guy was a great guy, by the way, because his modern psychology, he pitches out all the angels, all the demons, all the gods, and says that we're born with a tabula rasa, we're born with a blank slate, and the only thing that comes in is through experience and through reflection on experience. Okay, but if asked, how does the reflection get in there? How does this notion of being able to reflect get in there? Even he was a big atheist, and this was during the Enlightenment period, so they wanted to throw out all the divinities. And he says the reflection comes from God. So even he is saying that in some sense we were created in the image of God. In the Tamuna, we've got this Tamuna thing, but the Tamuna doesn't mean the image isn't our body. Okay, like a lot of people believe that God actually has a body and he looks like a man. Okay, if you spend a lot of time reading Maimonides, the Factor that Perplexed, that's the first thing that he's deconstructing. God does not have a body, and he does not look like a man, but the image that we're created in is the Tamuna, and the Tamuna is a self-referencing operator. Right? I'm saying.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you say then that self-referential activity, if you will, is something that is itself completely reflexive, or is it something that somebody decides to cultivate and practice? Because I think, we've all known people who, they have their answer to a question and it stops right there, and there's never any
question about
Right,
the answer.
right, or no, seemingly to us, to the external observer, there's seemingly no continuing dialogue, internal dialogue on the part of that particular person. It's like, this is the way it is. I have spoken,
Well, there's lots of people that have fixed opinions. That's not what we're talking about. You're right. Okay, fixed opinions is not what we're talking about. We're talking about thinking about your thinking.
Right.
We're talking about reflecting on your reflecting. We're talking about you yourself, knowing yourself. And knowing yourself, you end up knowing that you're reflected. You end up knowing this operator. And that's the way I'm contending that you get close to God. It's through knowing this operator. It's through spending a lot of time turning things in your mind, turning them around. I got a couple of exercises that are sort of fun to turn around to see where we go with
Just
this.
don't be offended. I have to answer Sheila in the office for a
That's
second.
fine. That's fine.
So David, can I jump in a minute?
Sure.
Sorry, I was late getting in because I couldn't find the password. So I struggled for 15, 20 minutes to find the password. I finally got in. So what I wanted to say was, I was listening to your conversation and I was thinking to myself,
By the way, this guy is a buddy of mine, Murray, who I've invited
Yeah.
to be here. And he is a knowledgeable guy, and we've been working together on various things.
I remember how he ducked out of the first episode. He's like, I gotta go.
No, he's got a class.
yeah, I still have,
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Murray, sorry.
yeah, so what I was going to say is that I think your conversation between the two of you is really interesting, but I was thinking about the context of the words, right? So you gave out the portion in Shmot in Exodus. You laid it out, but the context. What about the context of where the words sit and what they're intended to convey based on the context? And so, having read a lot of different ideas, you read. I looked at Maimonides' Mor Nevuchim, chapter 63. What he says is that God is telling Moses that he exists and he has never not existed. That's one obvious explanation. Rashi says, I am with you. I will always be with you. I've been with you before. I've been with you. I mean, however many different sources you read, you get a different point of view of what Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh means, right? And so it's all in the context, it seems to me. And it also seems to me that however you choose to think about it may be as legitimate as any other person's way of thinking about it.
Okay, but I'm not saying that it means anything, by the way. I don't think it means in the same way that a usual statement means. I'm saying it's an operator. It is something that we should be practicing, okay? It's something that we should be doing to ourselves. It's something that we should be doing internally to ourselves. It means the same thing as this means, for example. When I say, here's an example of the same kind of thing, not as profound. I say, I am living in the American dream. And then I say, the American dream is living in me. Now, what have I done with that? I'm living in the American dream and the American dream is living in me. How have I transformed one half of that statement to the other half? What have I done?
Well, it's a commutative experience.
Right. And it's an inversion. Okay, it's an inversion. As if I looked in the mirror and the left part became the right part. Here's another example of this. This is actually
When you talk, in my mind, when you talk about the self-referential activity, obviously in 2024, it brings to mind how much more common therapy has become, right? For people to examine themselves and their relationship to the universe, to the world, to the people and the things. And so what I hear when you talk about these concepts is what I've always felt myself, and that is that you're not part of something unless you are constantly examining the interrelationships between all of the pieces and what they do, what they accomplish, what they don't accomplish, where they're positive, where they're negative, how you're going to adjust. So you can't navigate a life as an ethical and moral person without that self-referential activity, right? But we know that there are plenty of people who do navigate the world just doing exactly what they want, and everything else be damned, or what they don't want.
Or what they're told to do, or they're following a prescriptive method. Okay, so there's always a sense of turning. Then you're turning things around to see how one changes into the other, etc.
Can we substitute examine for turning?
Yeah, sure. Examine and turning are the same kind of thing. Yeah, sure. Let me. So and the thing is about this particular feature of thought that I'm contending is the Tamuna, and is the thing that we inherited from the critter that made us. Okay, the critter that made us could not but put that thing in it. Just the way when we create something, by the way, when we let's say we're an artist and we create, say, a painting. That painting has in it are some aspect of ourselves, right? And what it has in it is it has in it some intellectual aspect of ourselves. So God creating us puts in it some intellectual aspect of themselves. And all creatures have this, by the way. Anything that's living has some semblance.
I like
This
that,
thing.
that example of an artwork, because I think most of us understand that an artwork also, for the viewer, has something of themselves in it, because they project themselves into whatever they're looking at and create a relationship with what they, at least what they think they see, right? And that's not necessarily anything like what the artist intended,
Right.
right? So they look at it and they say, you know, they usually, wow, that's a very interesting
Well,
banana.
in
you know.
fact, what about music? You know a lot about music. What do you think the musical composer is experiencing when he creates the piece of music? And isn't he creating the piece of music so that when we listen to the piece of music, we have the same experience he's hoping for that he felt when he created it, right? The same kind of thing.
It's a very interesting thought experiment, because I have felt for probably 20 or 30 years now that musicians, to a large extent, actually create music and play music only for themselves.
Sure.
And it's only by
Only by
chance
accident,
encounter
sure,
that
sure.
other people come to say, oh, I'm gonna listen to that. And this is, you know, but the musicians, like a poet, they would create music with no audience. Right? So Mozart, for example, is expressing emotions that he wants to express in his music. Or he's thinking of ideas that he wants to think about and express them somehow musically. And then another person can be charmed by it. Another person can be reviled, you know, by it, you know.
Okay, but music itself, especially classical music, is self-recurrent, right? It's
Right.
self-reflective. It's always turning. It's always turning. You always have a circular motion of classical music. And if you listen to it from that perspective and let it take you over, then you're getting to this self-reflective stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this circular motion inside of us is what we want to be getting. As children, we love that, okay? We'd spin around in a circle. And as we got older, it was harder to do that. So now what you do is you spin ideas around. You listen to music.
You
There's
stand
always,
still, let the world spin around
yeah,
you.
there's always a turning. Now, the other example of this is coming from Heraclitus. And Heraclitus in one of his aphorisms says, when I am asleep, I am dreaming the gods. When I am awake, what would be the next part? When I am asleep, I'm dreaming the gods. So use the method that we know to tell me when I am awake, what happens then? Yeah, right. So it's an inversion. It's a turning. Okay, so it's again like looking in a mirror. And what I'm saying is that if you practice this, you might end up like Moses. Someday you might wake up in the middle of the night with a huge light in your head. And if you're not afraid of it, and if you turn to look at it, then you might be on the right track for this kind of thing. There's a few other things here. Go ahead, Charles. Charles, you're a great interlocutor, okay?
I just wonder, by extension, then does that somehow imply that the plagues and the actual experience of the Exodus were all in those minds as well? And it was not necessarily physical events at all.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. If, for example, they're in a group of people's minds simultaneously,
Right, it's an experience.
then
Yeah.
it really happened, right? I mean, how do
Right.
we decide that this desk and all the stuff on
Right.
it is real? Because it's in our minds simultaneously, right? So these are not private experiences in the Torah. when lots and lots of people have the same internal experience, that experience is happening. There's no other way to talk about it, right? Anyway,
How? Trying to grasp how 600,000 men plus their wives.
But that makes it easier to understand.
plus chattel.
All
plus
have
chattel.
the same
Because God put it there, right?
experience. To such an extent that it became real.
Or the experience, not to say. It's hard to decide when it becomes real, really. Okay, but they all have the same experience and.
I'll tell you when it becomes real.
Right.
When the men and the women agree.
Yeah.
That's when it becomes real.
Okay,
Isn't it true that the 600,000 all experience that they have exited, and they're no longer experiencing the pain of slavery and the pain of the subjugation, and they are experiencing a similar pleasure, some similar,
and they're also getting manna too, which is an interesting experience that everybody, and that really is very special. So you have a large group of people that are experiencing that every morning when they get up, there's food around and they eat the food and it works.
and it doesn't have to be cleaned up.
And it doesn't have to be cleaned up and it works.
Hey, boo! Yo! Yo! Sorry, excuse me.
This is communication on a high level.
I'm listening. Welcome to.
Okay?
To do with anything.
So what's the what's the difference between 600,000 people having the same experience and one person who happened to write that the 600,000 had this experience and convinced everybody that it really happened?
Well, look at the first thing I said. I am in the American dream. Okay, I'm in a dream. I don't know. I woke up, I woke up, I got my pants on, I looked at my wallet. I went into something called, I went into something called the car. I said hello to my wife. This is the American dream, right?
It's a dream. Is it
Sure.
for real?
Well, this is an American dream that I'm in, that you're into, okay? And there's a huge amount of agreement with respect to the dream, right? Because in fact, there's such an agreement that we say that things are real. It's not a dream anymore. But I'm in the American dream, or is it that the American dream is in me? Which one? Are they both true? Are they both true? So what I'm pointing to is the relationship between those two statements. I'm in the American dream is in me. There's a relationship between those two statements, and the relationship is something that we created with this turning, with this self-referencing stuff that's in our minds, okay? Here's, let's see. Oh yeah, this is sort of interesting. Suppose this is self-referencing, but a different type of self-referencing. Suppose I said to you, what's coming out of my mouth now is a statement that is false. So I'm saying what's coming out of my mouth now is a statement that is false. Now I'm asking you, is that a true statement or a false statement? What I just said, what's coming out of my mouth now is false. Okay, is that true or false? That statement. That's sort of paradoxical, right? That turns out to be a kind of a paradox. And the
I would
paradox.
believe that depending on who's saying it.
Well, yeah, no, but whenever we say, but the paradox gets deconstructed when you think of there's something called the use mention problem. If I say the statement, I'm using it, but then I refer to it. I refer to the statement. I say the statement, whatever I said is false.
That's the Nixon problem.
And then I refer to the statement. When I refer to the statement and try and make sense out of it, is the statement true or false? What I just said, that everything coming out of my mouth is false. That's worthwhile thinking about. It's only worthwhile thinking. So all of these things are useful to think about. What are they useful for? They're useful to enhance the kind of circularity in our thinking that we're trying to get to. We're trying to get the circularity in our thinking, the self-referential circularity in our thinking, because I am convinced that through that particular method, you can accomplish something, okay? So if you can give up thinking and thinking only in the subject-object plane, where your thinking is only objective, okay? If you can give that up and start thinking in a different way, it's interesting. Now, let's get back to, let's get back to self-knowledge, okay?
I wanted to ask how you relate this to the Saltzman excerpt.
Yeah,
that we read, because now there's an element, at least the way I looked at it and the way I related that. There's this element of the frame of reference, right? We examine things. The circularity is not, you might be referring to pure observation. But I think that pure observation doesn't really exist.
No.
Everything's within a context. Everything's within a frame of reference. So, being able to, as the Saltzman described, get out of yourself and look down upon yourself, and that's the self-referential
right.
view. But you still have to be able to, you're still making judgments about what you see in relation to something. So, when
you can't lose your common sense, your way of negotiating around the world.
sense,
Yeah. Well, you can't, if you lose that, then you're really screwed. So you want to be able to keep.
So that was my question. My question then is, where's the dividing line between this kind of self-referential turning and examining? And, something that we complain about frequently in a certain style of thinking, which is where we equivocate, right? So we're looking at things and from all different angles, and then of course we're making the wrong connections, or we're making the wrong comparisons, and so we talk about this frequently with in terms of morality and ethics with regards to human action and history, and saying that, well, one thing is really like the other, and so what happened is okay, or what we're going to do is okay. Yeah, does that make any sense?
Yeah, well, it's hard to make judgments on a material plane that are going to be correct forever. I mean, it's just very difficult to do that. There's a lot of problems with that. And what we try and do is we try and separate ourselves from the judgment making part of it, so that in fact we reflect on the judgment that we've just made. Okay, we reflect on it, and we reflect on it in a higher plane. Okay, so yeah, we sort of pull back from it. We transcend ourselves, the self that has just made the judgment, and say, is that right? Did I do the right thing? So what I've done is I'm now looking at myself in the past who made the judgment. And as I'm looking at myself in the past that made the judgment, I might see this, I might see that. I still may not be able to come to an answer as to whether the judgment was correct or not.
So when does that all collapse back into action?
Well,
In terms of how Moses makes a decision
yeah.
about what he's going to do.
And there has to be a collapse to it. There has to be a collapse. There has to be, okay, the hell of it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's give it a
We'll
try.
try this. Right?
Right.
But you still have to use your common sense.
Well, yeah, of course. You still, but there is a collapsing. There is a collapsing the thing into a present act. And what you're trying, if you have time to think about what you're about to do, that's really great. But at a certain point, when push comes to shove, you have to act on something. At that point, the action may or may not be correct. the nice thing about thinking is you don't have to worry about whether it's correct or not, because there's no particular judgments about, and it's all.
There's no consequence yet.
There's no consequence.
Not yet.
That's right. So thinking is where we're at, what we're about. We're thinking about thinking. Okay? It's almost like the eye seeing itself. Okay? If I know myself, I have to know the knower too. I have to know the person that's knowing me, which is me. So I have to turn around and get to know the knower. It's all this turning thing, this circular self-referencing thing that takes us somewhere. It does take us somewhere. Now, if you ask me, which I've been struggling with for a long time, how does it work? How does it actually take us in? How does it open up a door?
Yeah.
How does it open up a door for us? I'm not sure.
Is God being looked at as self-examining and self,
Charles says.
I would
yes.
say yes,
Charles says.
but not in this story. This particular story is not one of those stories. Those are other stories, like the flood and several other things.
but this particular one, when God is being asked, who exactly are you? By Moses.
I mean, who am I? Who am I to ask God what? Or what? Who is Moses?
But who are you? What do you do? I want to understand. what
Oh,
you
I
do.
see. Okay. Yeah, God is being asked by Moses.
But God does not answer in a self.
Sure he does. He says, I am what I
that
am, or I will be what I will be. So what God answers is not in a formal structured way. Okay, God is not giving you an image of himself, he's giving you an operation. Okay, he's giving you an operation. This, I'm contending, is the operation that we have inside of us.
Yeah.
Same
yeah.
operation, same operation. God is more than that operation. I have
We
to tell you,
understand
okay?
ourselves.
Well, I mean, doesn't this in some way harken back to Adam naming the animals? Right, so, the act of naming is a concretizing of a thing, right? So in this case, you can say God is, you can't describe exactly what God is, but nonetheless, in some sense, right, this is a return of God to the lives of the Israelites. Because they've been in Egypt for 400 years, and most of that time was actually very pleasant. Right?
Right,
The way
right.
the history is related to us,
Yeah.
they were living a good life there until
Till this
regime
yeah,
change, right? Okay.
Regime change.
So at that point, their lives became difficult. And at that point, they needed God for something. When times were good, they maybe didn't feel that they needed God so much at that moment, right? And so they weren't as diligent about doing whatever they did in terms of cultivating a relationship with God. So now God says, I hear their cry, and I am coming back here. I'm returning. I'm descending to bring my people out of slavery and to take them towards something that I have decided is their future, right? And so Moses asking for a name is actually a very, very logical thing to do, because when he goes back to the people and the people say, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I had this vision of a burning bush, and then a voice came to me, and I don't know, it seems like something important, and maybe we ought to do what that notion is. No, it's like, Ehyeh gave me a direct order to come to you and to announce to you that God is back. To help you, right? I mean, that's in the text.
There is a tradition, a piece of the tradition, that the Ehyeh, the turning, the self-referencing thing, that God told him to tell these people.
Yeah.
So he only told that to a group of intellectuals. Okay, the average guy who's doing the yard, etc., he wouldn't have understood this. But he told this to a group of intellectuals. And he said, now God told me to do this to yourself. to do this to yourself. So these guys are sitting there and they're really working hard to be able to get this thing turning inside themselves. And the same door opens to them as who had opened to Moses. And they say, I know what you're talking about. So the thing is you're not going to get an image out of this. You're not going to get a concrete thing that God is a big guy up there that, you don't want him to hit you, you don't want him to smash you, whatever it is. You're going to get some sort of a personal experience out of this. It's going to be a personal experience. And if you practice this particular thing, we're all going to have this personal experience. And then the intellectuals in the group, after a little period, they're going to say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. There is something like that. Okay, so the thing is, it isn't a name. It isn't a name in the sense that once I have the name, I have an attribute of the thing. Once I know something is a dog versus something is a rat.
That's a way to talk about it.
Right, you have a way to talk about it. Now, I don't know whether this gives you a way to talk about it. This just gives you a way to approach it.
Point of reference.
Right, well, but it
Right,
may not
whatever
even
it
be,
is.
it may not be a point. It may not be a point. It may just be.
Broad smear.
Yeah, okay. It may be a way of approaching the thing. So it isn't like we're gonna find something concrete out of this. It's not gonna be concrete. It's going to be an experience. And you're gonna have hopefully the same experience that little kids have when they turn themselves around. Now, what's the experience that little kids have? The 4-year-olds spin themselves around and collapse to the ground. What are they looking for here? Well, they're looking to crack out the teaching and the grammar and the words that are all sitting in their head, but it's making sense of the world. When they came into the world, they didn't have that. They had some kind of a free-floating sense of where they were with respect to the world. So the world wasn't much different from them. Okay, there was no differentiation between themselves and the world. So when they spin around, they crack that open and they get back to that place. And that's what, in fact, if you talk to people who are trying to describe the experience they might have had when they get close to something divine, it's that their boundaries, their structure sort of comes apart and they feel at one with everything. That's a very common experience, is feeling at one with it. When we look at Martin Buber, we'll be talking about that, because Martin Buber is trying to sort out these kinds of feelings, feeling at one, feeling taken over by, he's trying to make distinctions in that particular realm of what people call mystical experiences. And that's what you have. It's called mystical because it can't be described concretely and in a way
My
that.
entire life is mystical and I can't describe anything.
No, it's hard to get clarity for anything in life. So anyway, all right, very fun talk. Thank you, Charles. For
Oh, my pleasure.
meeting the-
So
I-
did
I-
we get through all of this, or did we only got?
Well, we were.
Well,
he
This is a
knew-
vehicle for
he
the
knew.
important stuff.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. He knew what we were looking for.
All righty, I gotta unfortunately
Okay,
go to another Zoom meeting. Yeah,
okay.
thank you, David.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks a lot, you guys.
Very interesting.
Thank you very
Okay, we'll see
much.
you next week.
So I have a. Zoom
See you next
meeting
week,
now,
you
probably
guys.
Till somewhere close to noon, so I mean,